What was the strange overlap between David Bowie and the occult? Increasingly less like performance and more like possession, from Ziggy Stardust to the Thin White Duke, from Crowley's Shadow to Gnostic readings of pop culture. It's not so much what Bowie did, but what people believed he became. There's a star man waiting in the sky, and he'd love to come and meet us, here on Things Visible and Invisible. Miguel Connor is a writer and host of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, a podcast dedicated to Gnosticism and occult philosophy. He's known for exploring the hidden spiritual and esoteric dimensions of pop culture, including books on Elvis Presley and David Bowie, where he interprets their art through myth, mysticism and transformation. And he joins me down the line from his home in Illinois. Miguel, welcome back to Things Visible and Invisible.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
David Bowie was famous, some say infamous, for his performative nature, both on stage and off. When it comes to the occult, many people will be asking, was David Bowie's interest or more in the occult simply a performative element of his stage persona?
No, not at all. I would say, as they say here, he ate his own dog food. The quest for God, which he himself talked often, even during the depths of his drug addiction and Nazi black magic, was a search for spiritual realms. And that was certainly a thrust. That was a fuel for most of his life, even though often those who are seeking God are also trying to run away from demons. Sometimes we do that. It's not so much because we want to know as because they are things that are destroying us. There's trauma, there is pain, and we are trying to figure the world out. And very much like Elvis's life was all one exploration of the search for God, the search for self-knowledge, and the search for spirituality. So all of his personas, most of his music was this sort of powerful theme of running away from demons and trying to search a higher power to help him heal and share that healing to those who really were Bowie fans, the outcasts, the persons at the edge of town, the forgotten, and so forth. So, in essence, Bowie and spirituality, as I argue in my book, are inseparable.
Well, we better start at the beginning. Talk to me a little bit about Bowie's formative years, his early childhood in London, for example.
Well, he was born in, he wasn't born in London. He was born in Brixton. And as I write, he was broken from the beginning. One of the big themes, just like in my Elvis book, is that of the wounded healer. How in shamanistic cultures, it is the one that is broken, who's had a near-death experience or some horrible trauma, who becomes the shaman of the tribe, the magic user, the artist. Shamans, music and performative acts and costumes are part of the shaman. And these individuals, because they are broken, have the cracks have opened to reality and have access to the spirit world. Maybe I'm getting too complicated at the go, but let's put it this way. Bowie was very traumatized at a young age, and it really shaped most of his life. We have to remember that unlike the United States or even Japan or Russia, these rising powers after World War II, the British Empire was ending and it was collapsing and it was a disaster. David was born in 1948, and he lived basically in a dystopia, a place where food had to be rationed in the UK, electricity was sparse, children played in bomb shelters. It was a very different world, and he grew up in very harsh poverty with a lot of limits. add to the fact that he came from a family that suffered from a lot of mental issues, schizophrenia, depression, and it was something that was just passed down the line. And that was one of his big worries was, am I going to go crazy like the rest of his family? I argue that many of his personas was him just splintering his mind to try to deal with this mental disease. He also had an abusive mother who was very cold, very strict, very detached, and other issues that really, you might say, created deep trauma with David. At the same time, his mother believed in telepathy. He was very much turned on at an early age to the counterculture, to mysticism, and he himself had abilities of, at an early age, of telepathy, magic, and that grew into an interest as he became a teenager. So my book tries to explain the tropes you always hear, Sean, right? He was a chameleon. He was androgynous. He was an innovator. But nobody ever says, well, why? Why was he David Bowie? What made David Bowie? And my book answers that from the beginning, from his childhood, from his interests, supernatural events he had, including spotting UFOs at a young age, and other situations that eventually created this persona. There's David Jones, as he was called, but he took the persona of David Bowie, and he started taking other personas. The most famous is obviously Ziggy Stardust, which, as I argue, were forms of magic, rituals, therapy, coping skills. Often we have to disassociate with the pain and our trauma and have a conversation with it to be able to understand ourselves. So, in essence, that's David, out of the gate, like Elvis. He was fated to be broken, but he was also fated to express this to others and find different spiritualities that would work with him. And he was much more visible or obvious when adopting them and putting it into his various albums and so forth. And lastly, as I put in the book, Gnosticism was a very important part of David's music, worldview, growth as a person, and so forth. So, yeah, he was born in Brixton, then he moved to Bromley, and it was later when he started to look for fame in the mid 60s that he went to London.
Well,
I hope that wasn't too much, but again, if you say you can't stop me. You can't stop me talking about him.
no,
Sorry, Sean.
it's not too much at all. And we're going to unpack a lot of what you've said there. But I'd just like to stay with the chronology, if we may, just for a little bit longer, because obviously he was born in the 40s. By the 60s, music was the thing, especially in the UK, for young adolescents. Was he always drawn to music, or do you think he's somebody who could have maybe moved into another art form or art forms, or was he somebody who really just hit on music because it was the thing, it was a la mode at the time?
Yeah, he could have gone different ways, but he had two huge influences that sparked his awakening. Obviously, the UK was more open to colored music, as they called it, jazz, blues, and so forth, than it was in the United States. And it really flooded the youth of that time, and it really influenced a whole generation. And with David, there were two figures that awoke him. One was Little Richard, who he thought was some sort of, again, alien from another dimension. He couldn't believe that there was a figure like that, and he felt so connected to this figure. And the other one was Elvis Presley. There's a story where he was he one day he saw his cousin dancing to a hound dog, and he saw the joy and the passion and the freedom of her dancing, and he suddenly went, this is what I want. This is what I want to tap into, this power to make others happy, to awaken them, to give them a joy. And it also brings a joy within me. And so these figures really awoke him. And David was born on January 8th, the same day as Elvis Presley. And his mother never let him forget that, said, you could be like him. And that was one of his drives throughout his learning of music and writing music. So the two flames, you could say, were as far as music and artistic expression would be Elvis Presley and Little Richard.
It's very interesting the way you framed that awakening, because you talked about his awakening, but also his ability to see the power of that awakening, both in himself and other people. Is this something which he was able to understand in a spiritual sense, or are we talking just in the showbiz sense of somebody wanting to make a name for themselves?
Well, David was very intuitive, almost psychic. I present many examples in the book. A simple one is, at a bar with friends, people could say numbers from this to that, and he could guess it with a 99% accuracy. So he was a very intuitive person. He knew where he needed to go, and he knew that he needed to sort of surf the times and figure out how he would best express him. I mean, unlike Elvis, who came out straight out of the gate, or Little Richard, who just came out in the mid-50s and were superstars immediately, it took him almost 10 years to become famous, to break through. And it was a lot of testing. He tried being a mod. He tried the folk music. He tried different things. And even when he put out Space Oddity in 1969, it was more of a novelty hit because it was associated with the Apollo landing of the moon. But he kept trying, he kept studying, he kept looking at all these different art forms, not just music, but mime and others. It's almost like he was on this market research exploration of himself. And at the same time, he also started exploring different forms of spirituality. He was a very committed Tibetan Buddhist, almost quit the music industry to become a monk. I think we talk how Elvis almost quit twice to become a monk because he was so passionate about it. And how he was able to lift his body off the ground, and he was learning to astral travel, but he was learning a lot about other disciplines, mystic Christianity, Thelema, and others. And so this sort of exploration of looking at these different traditions, both spiritual and musical, really started coming together. And it's almost like the world wasn't ready for David Bowie until the 70s. He's obviously known as the founder of glam rock. And that made sense because the 60s had sort of died a slow death. The great artists were either on drugs, they were dying. You had the Manson family incident was considered, the dark side of the hippie. The Altamont with the Rolling Stones was this dark Woodstock. The 60s, as you might say, had kind of failed humanity. It had not brought its promise. And there comes David Bowie with this mixture of science fiction and Buddhism and Crowley ideas and Nietzsche and all these different types of music that he'd learned, and he throws them together into this sort of space messiah, and he was off to the races in the early 70s, and his influence really changed the world. It changed music. Some say it saved music and reoriented rock and roll to what it should have been, sort of this powerful, rebellious, and out of this world, almost fierce shamanistic discipline.
Now, just as you're talking there, I'm sort of reflecting that you're right. David Bowie doesn't seem to quite belong to the 1960s. However they influenced him musically, he doesn't quite belong to it. Whereas the 70s, he's quintessential, if you like, to the rock and roll rock era of the 1970s. You referenced there a number of sort of philosophical and esoteric elements of his thinking, of his world. How much of that was consciously played into his lyrics, his music, his personas, and how much of it was just subliminal stuff that he had sort of picked up and was part of who he was. How much of this was conscious, I guess I'm asking?
I think at the beginning it was very conscious. Again, he is mentioning figures like Jung and Crowley, and he's singing about Buddhist lands and astral travel and so forth. And then he sort of goes off the rails, if you would. One of his big influences was William Burroughs. And William Burroughs, I present all the different Gnostic luminaries that really influenced David, and he was very conscious of them. But Burroughs was a very big figure. And Burroughs always said that the great archon is language and the other archon is time. These are the two things that keep us in thrall of these evil centipede aliens and their Mayan priests that are controlling the world. And David loved this. But Burroughs believed in this system called the cut up technique, that the way to fool our program mind was to cut things up and sort of throw them together into a stew and just accept how it would be. A lot of Burroughs novels are that. He cuts up scenes, he cuts up timelines, characters, and just throws them together. In other words, allowing your soul or your subconscious to take charge, the real part of you. And David adopted that, especially with albums like Diamond Dogs and so forth. And so it was both, because these albums give powerful messages about dystopia, about oppression, about alien beings and mind parasites and so forth. And this would continue through so many of his albums, this sort of Gnostic expression of the world we live in, the fallen world we live in. And then in the late 70s, he meets Brian Eno, who's he was a former member of Roxy Music, and considered then one of the great experimental producers. And Brian Eno believed in the same thing. So so his Berlin trilogy with songs like Heroes and so forth, this is Brian and David almost doing this magical spell where they're throwing things together and saying, here it is, and somehow it worked.
Now, you and I will know that many artists have employed, shall we say, aspects of the esoteric or occult imagery or symbolism for just that, for a kind of performance, and it means very little to them. From what you're saying, however, it seems that would it be fair to say, I guess I'm asking, in David Bowie's life and his career, that the occult is a sort of running theme, prominent at certain times, but always in the background?
Oh, always. There's no doubt about it. He's always, again, mentioning Buddhist themes and Gnostic themes and magic themes, but it some often depended what was really of interest. I write that Gnosticism is sort of this umbrella force that was moving him through figures like William Burroughs and Carl Jung, and later on reading the Gnostic Gospels and so forth. But he had, of course, all these interests that really shaped his music and his artistry and certainly his lyrics. For example, at some point, when his cocaine habit became out of control, sort of in the mid 70s, during Young Americans and so forth, he started becoming really interested in very dark forms of Cabala. He became enamored with Nazi occultism. He became he went very dark and very deep into this thing and very paranoid. He thought he was being chased by witches. He was performing uh, ceremonial magical events. He was writing sigils all over his apartment and his house, and that really became part of his music, and it shows up, including there is his album Station to Station, and the song Station to Station seems to be one long Kabbalistic ritual if you look at it. And obviously, as I argue, Kabbalah is just the Jewish form of Gnosticism. So it really depended what he was into. and it certainly always shows up in a lot of most of his albums. Ufology, aliens, Nietzsche, all these things are almost common. Orwellian themes of surveillance state; those are almost always common too in a lot of his works.
Now, you've researched his whole life. Would you say that, because you've referenced Gnosticism a number of times with David Bowie, and we both know that Gnosticism is a very, shall we say, an eclectic term, meaning many things and sometimes different things to different people. But would you say that in your researches you have discerned certain constant threads, esoteric threads within David Bowie's life from very early years right up to his death? I mean, were there constants, or was it a case of, as you've alluded to, just whatever he happened to be into at the time?
Are you talking about in terms of Gnosticism
No,
or the occult?
more his general reading, is more his interests, esoterica. He seemed, I mean, you've referenced so many things already. He seems to have been into different things at different times and playing around with different things. I'm just wondering, what were the constants that you've discerned in his life spiritually for him?
Well, again, his idea of his Gnostic idea that we are trapped in this world, that we live in a surveillance dystopian world. Again, you could say, is that Gnosticism, or is that because he grew up in England, which was such a dystopia, and he had political views about the collapse of England and the direction of the country. So those are there. The death of God was very important to him. He was very much into Nietzsche, and he used to say, we suddenly live in this advanced technological world with an atom bomb and these incredible technology. Who will replace God? And often his answer throughout his work was, we. We must find the divine within, which is a very Gnostic idea. The idea of identity, of course, is very important, which he got from Buddhism. The idea of the oppression of organized religion happens a lot in his work, even in his very commercial "Let's Dance." If you listen to Modern Love, that's a very anti-religious think for yourself kind of song, despite the pop vibrations of it. And again, ufology, extraterrestrials. Is there a superior form of man? He, again, with reading Nietzsche, reading Nazism, or even Gnosticism, or even Buddhism, there was a wonder, are there higher beings that could be out there and help us out? Is it time for we humans to evolve into a higher form, to go beyond us and embrace again this technological world where the old God has died, and who will replace this God? So these are definitely some of the constant themes that you find in David's work, especially in the 70s and parts of the 80s. I mean, one thing he always said, he hated writing love songs because they're so contrived, and you'll notice you rarely find a David Bowie love song.
That's true. Now, on the last occasion we spoke, you nailed the myth that Elvis Presley was not well read. In fact, when it came to the occult and esoterica, he seemed to be very well read. Conversely, David Bowie is famously very well read. Many people have referenced his voracious appetite for reading and very wide reading. When it came to esoterica, the occult in general, would you say that his reading was wide, or was it deep?
I would say it's pretty well, it's kind of wide. He loved comic books. He loved a good novel. Again, he was a voracious reader. Like uh, as I mentioned in our last interview, Elvis had always workers carrying 200 books on the occult. I think David had an entire library because, yeah, he enjoyed reading poetry, he enjoyed reading philosophy, French comics, anything spiritual. And you can go right now on the internet and type in. He had that famous list before he
That's right.
passed. My favorite 100 books, and it is varied, and it's a wonderful list, and it goes everywhere. I mean, French authors, authors from South America, different forms of fiction, and yes, there was a few Gnostic books like Elaine Pagels' The Gnostic Gospels, or Harold Bloom and the New Religion, and so forth. So yeah, he was always learning, like Elvis, always trying to learn at the same time, he was very much a practitioner of these things. He didn't just fill his head with all this knowledge. He loved to meditate. He employed the tarot. He used astrology. During his dark days, he was, as mentioned, doing a lot of ceremonial magic. So yeah, he was always trying to get to the experience of the artists and the experience of the mystics. And you can make an argument, Sean, that they are one and the same, right?
Well, on the last occasion, interestingly, you linked Elvis Presley's sufferings, shall we put it like that, to the idea of the shaman, the shamanic idea of those sufferings. I'm just thinking in the 1970s in particular, David Bowie had his own sufferings. He had, it's well known that he had a lot of problems with drugs and a lot of difficulties and almost died. Footage of him of that era, he looks decidedly ill. Was this, in your reading, part of this shamanic element?
Yeah, you could say so. Again, he was broken already, and I mentioned the reasons, and I go even further. In the late 60s, of course, other problems arose. His hero, his luminary was his brother Terry, who turned him on into jazz and Jack Kerouac and all the sort of counterculture stuff. And David adored him. He was again his exemplar, but unfortunately, Terry was beset by schizophrenia, and he lost his brother, went into the asylum, and he never left. That broke his heart. His father's death also affected him late in the 60s, just when he was at the cusp of fame. So life just kept happening like it happens to others, but he never really was addressing the trauma of his childhood. Again, he was, beyond what I said, he was a very sensitive kid, but his type was not welcome in the UK in the 50s. For example, he talks about he was left-handed, and he would go to school and his teacher would hit his left hand because in those days in the UK, well, I grew up that too. Left-handed people were scorned at, and he was beaten because and taught to write with his right hand. So he went through a lot, but he didn't really deal with his trauma. Very much like Elvis, he assumed fame and being loved by people. My mother didn't love me. My neighborhood didn't love me. England was a mess. Maybe if I become famous, I'll find that love. And of course, it just brought pure emptiness, which began to, and when you have that emptiness, when you're famous, often like Elvis or David, you start fueling it with drugs because you don't have that answer. And that drug search becomes also a search for God. Even Jung said the addict in his way is looking for God. He's looking to get out of his ego. He's looking for an alternative state of mind, but he's just on the wrong path of looking for God because that brings in the demon. So that's what happened. He was broken. He was a wounded healer, as I say, that shaman, and he was not addressing his issues. So that climaxed in the 70s, even though it gave us some of his best work ever, classic work that would later shape punk and new wave and Britpop and so forth. It was a horrible time for him, and he luckily in the late 70s, with the help of Iggy Pop, his friend, his sort of co-sponsor, he was able to wean himself off of cocaine, but he still had a problem with alcoholism through the rest of his life. It wasn't only until the late 90s that he finally went into Alcoholics Anonymous and completely quit all substances. And it's sad because there's an interview, Sean, where the journalist is asking, so you've quit everything? You don't even drink, not a glass of wine here and there? He says, no. And he said, why not? He said, because I was tired of waking up every day and hating my life. He said that when he was in his 40s, 50 million in the bank, women lining up the door, one of the most famous musicians in all of history, and he hated himself. So he eventually had to realign himself, and you might say the 90s was when he really more openly and on purpose started embracing Gnostic spirituality and sort of cleaning up his life and just becoming a different David Bowie.
Well, I mean, there are many David Bowies, as I'm sure has been pointed out. There is something very different from the David Bowie of the 1980s and 90s to the 1970s. The 1970s, he was one of the kings of the rock world, I suppose. By the 1980s, however, he was somebody who was referenced more as a role model, as somebody that people looked up to, rather than simply his music. His music, people were a little bit disappointed by some of his music in the 80s, I can remember. And then after that, he became one of those stars that just seemed to be there forever. Do you think that this journey that he was on, which you've chronicled, do you think that he found some sort of peace? And was it through AA and his friends and, shall we say, the more mundane things of life? Or was there something deeper? Because at the very start of this, you referenced that all of his life was a search for God. Do you think that in any way he approached that as he got older?
As he got older, yes, I think he found a lot of peace with Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, the 80s was sort of a trap because we have to remember in the 70s, he sold a lot of records, went on a lot of tours, appeared in movies, but he also, as happened with bands like the Beatles and Pink Floyd, he got ripped off by his manager. He made some very bad deals. So he wasn't, you might say he wasn't rich in the late 70s. He was more like upper middle class. Uh, and he also was seeing bands like Queen and Pink Floyd and others who were selling out stadiums and bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars. And he was like, I'm the foundation for many of these acts. Duran Duran is selling millions of copies, and what's going on here? And he finally decided he was going to reach the peak of who David Bowie is, which is the rock star he invented, one of his personas. So you might say, as someone said, he kind of sold out with Let's Dance. He made the most pop-heavy album he could have, and that's what he did in the late 80s. And he got, as they say, he had FU money. That's the kind of money he got. Very, very wealthy. He was one of the most famous singers in the world, second to Michael Jackson, probably. But him selling out kind of destroyed him, too, because all of a sudden he turned away his loyal fans. He sort of lost his ability to always be one step ahead of the music industry. And he almost quit the music industry because he thought, maybe I've just run out of fuel. Maybe I no longer have the writing chops. And yeah, I'm rich, but now I'm just like no better than Phil Collins or somebody like that, one of those artists, one of those shallow artists. So that changed him to, again, go to Tin Machine, but that forced him to really look inward. Again, he was always spiritual, always reading, always looking, but to say, okay, now I have to really get serious, as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, half measures availed us not. I got to quit all alcohol, all substance abuse. I got to get really into a meditation technique. I got to start acting like an adult and less like a rock star. And things got much better within David's life. He married. He became very much. He became happy for the first time in his life and found peace. And the idea of fame and all that didn't matter. And he accepted his idea as sort of a mentor, as sort of a pioneer. He didn't have to pretend to be this cutting edge, shocking artist anymore. And he was happy. As I write in my book, though, Sean, at the end, I don't think he was happy. I think he still was holding into the material world. And as shocking as it sounds, part of his soul is still trapped in the bardos, those liminal spaces of Buddhism. And he's waiting for us to call him back. And his famous death ritual, Blackstar, kind of sets it all up. Explains it.
What do you make of all that? I mean, if we go up towards the end of his career and the end of his life, indeed, because his career and his life sort of ended at the same time. It was a very symbolic sort of ending. What did you make of the more overt imagery that people have alluded to, the sort of almost satanic or occultist ideas that have been labeled or laid at his door? What do you make of all of that?
Well, for sure. I mean, just look at Blackstar. That is one death ceremonial ritual. And if you look at the videos, Lazarus and Blackstar, very much, as I argue in my book and from other scholars, it is one long Gnostic ritual that shows the evil demiurge of the Gnostics and Sophia, the savior goddess, and so forth. And there's a lot, yeah, there's so much incredible symbolism. Now, Blackstar probably would be, it's a symbol for Saturn, because I see, as David shows in his music, there's this tyrannical god that suppresses, and the Gnostics always associated Saturn with the demiurge. Black Star 2 is an Elvis Presley song that goes, when a man sees a black star, his time will come. And as I argue in the book, the parallels between David and Elvis, beyond the coincidences of their birth and so forth, are just extraordinary. So yeah, the mystical and the magic and the para historical and sociological were always, yeah, part of his life. I mean, in some albums like Next, he's getting melancholic and he's writing about his past and sharing his mistakes and so forth. But yeah, I mean, the space messiah, magical starman was always part of his music and his belief system.
You've alluded to it a number of times. I mean, I'm wondering, did Elvis and David Bowie, did their paths ever cross?
They did indeed. They did indeed. The first time was 1973. Elvis did his only shows at Madison Square Garden in New York. I think he did 3 shows. And David flew in with his guitarist to see him. But because of the flight being delayed, it was late. And David was late, but he was dressed up like Ziggy Stardust. So he's going through the crowd and everybody's turning around and like, what's going on? And Elvis was furious. And David said he gave him a look, if looks could kill. And David was crushed because that was his hero that he'd waited so long to see him. And he was like, I didn't want embarrassment. He was the center of my world. And he felt so ashamed. Then later on, there was supposed to be a party because both Elvis was in RCA Records, and RCA Records said, look, the only thing that's keeping us up in business is Elvis's sales. We want you to take over because you're the next big thing. And he was so, it was such an honor. Like, I could be the next Elvis. And there was a party, and David was like, David, of course, was joking. The king of rock and roll is about to meet the queen of rock and roll. And the only thing that matters is that I am younger than him. But then things didn't go well. But then later on, before one of his tours, Elvis sent him a note saying, good luck with your tour. And he kept that note for the rest of his life. He was touched that Elvis would just write, good luck. So Elvis knew about him. And then there's the great story by Dwight Yoakam, who after David died said that, before that, the song by David, Golden Years, which is in Station to Station, he wrote that for Elvis. Now, we don't know the story. One story says that Elvis just turned it down. The other story was that David was so shy, he gave it to his wife, Angela, and said, can you take it to Elvis, see if he likes it? And she chickened out. So Elvis never got a chance to do the song. You could almost hear that song being done by Elvis, Golden Years. But that was the end. But going back to Dwight Yoakam, yes, he said that Elvis, before he died, reached out to David and said, will you produce my next album? It was a hunch, a gut thing. And one thing about David is he was a, great songwriter, but he was a master producer. Lou Reed, Iggy Pop, so many bands he brought to fame. And of course, David was going to do it, but then Elvis left the cosmic building, so we never got that album. And I always wonder what this incredible album would have been. I think it would have brought Elvis back. It would have been another big comeback if he'd allowed David to produce his album.
It's an absolutely fascinating thought. Unfortunately, we have to leave the building now. So tell people where they can find out more about you, your work, and your various books.
I would go to, there's my name, Miguel Connor, one word, no capitals.com, and go there. I haven't put up anything about the Occult David Bowie since it won't be out till January. But you can find my Elvis book, and wherever you are, you can already pre-order the Occult David Bowie. But there's links to my podcasts, social media, and all that good stuff.
Miguel, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Enjoy it as always. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.